Okay, so going to the more traditional, well, not traditional when you're considering the native view, but the westernized scientific view, as far as we know, the Americas prior to 1492, prior to contact made between Europeans and natives, uh, were not yet known. So civilizations had existed there for thousands of years, and but as far as we know, humans are not native to the continents in the Western Hemisphere. They're native to the Eastern Hemisphere, to Africa. Starting approximately, we think 15,000 BCE, before current era, people from Upper Mongolia migrated across a land bridge at what is today the Bering Strait. And this process took hundreds or thousands of years in itself, and they spread across the continents. Uh, Although, what we're learning lately, there's been some archaeological finds in the past 10 to 15 years that indicate this process may have happened much earlier than we thought. Instead of 15,000 BCE, it may have been 25 or 35,000 BCE. Uh, there, you might have heard of the Kennewick Man controversy, which predates some of what Westerners had originally uh, assumed about indigenous migration from Asia to the Americas. So they may have been around much longer in North America than we originally thought. But the old assumption was 15,000 BCE. It may be 30,000 for all we know now. Uh, but we do know that originally they were hunting large mammals, the megafauna. Through a combination of overhunting and climate change, the megafauna died out. The world got warmer, and this changed the process of development for Native Americans, since their lives before that had been based on hunting these large mammals. Uh, After that, most of the large mammals in the Americas died out, and so the largest mammals that you had were bears and deer, uh, caribou, things like that, which aren't really animals useful for riding and stuff like that. So the medium-sized mammals that were left, deer, um, moose, bears, um, things of that nature, those weren't really fit for domestication. So other than llamas, alpacas, and dogs, not many natives domesticated any mammals. So whereas in the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western world, they domesticated sheep and pigs and cattle. The Native Americans didn't have those animals to domesticate, and deer and things like that don't really take well to domestication. Uh, so the natives after 15,000 BCE, or around, we think this climate change occurred between about 9,000 and 5,000 BCE. It started to get warmer, and the people adjusted to the new ecosystem by creating new specialized tools and exploiting the resources of their geographic areas. So these are some examples of what archaeologists have found in various digs. So on the left here, you have the Clovis points, and these these points were larger for use against the larger mammals. The Folsom points are smaller, and these are the ones that we find from the later sites that were used for hunting smaller mammals. When the megafauna died out, this is what we find more of. So we're going to focus on North America mostly in this class, since that's the continent where the United States is situated. And we're going to focus specifically on the natives that first encountered Europeans the most. Uh, there were many natives in South America, which we don't have time to discuss everything, and so we're not going to discuss too many of the natives of South America, though I highly recommend you take a class on South American indigenous people at some point if you get a chance, but we're not going to focus on them too much. Briefly speaking, each society had advantages and disadvantages based on where they lived. Some had more agriculture, others had more propensity to develop cities. Some built pit houses that surrounded ceremonial areas, such as the Mogallons in New Mexico, the Hohokams in Arizona, and in northern Mexico used irrigation grids to harvest their crops. There was a large civilization that built platform mounds for ball courts, and those are seen throughout Mexico and through that southeast U.S. And there was just it's hard to emphasize enough how different so many people were. So I'm going to talk about a few. So, for example, I discussed the Mogallons. They were the ones who built those ball courts. They lived here in what's now the Chihuahua area of Mexico. The Hohokams, these are different names for what are called ancestral Puebloans. And they had all kinds of cities and things like that. You can still go to some of these sites, which I highly recommend. So an example of some of those sites are the Taos Pueblo and the Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. These are examples of the apartment-style, high-density housing that some natives used, and they were able to develop this because they had irrigation processes that allowed them to collect water and grow enough food. Around 500 BCE, woodland cultures east of the Mississippi began to build burial mounds. And so we call these the mound building cultures. And this suggests that there was some kind of a political hierarchy of some sort that archaeologists term a chiefdom. It's unknown how that system may have worked, but it's clear that one or a small number of people commanded the labor and obedience of very large numbers of people, and that made up these chiefdoms. So one example were called the Adena people, which are over here in this area of Ohio. The Adena cultural distribution here in the green. They built hundreds of burial mounds in and around what's today Ohio. Digs have discovered spear points, stone pipes, sheets of mica, which is a glass-like material shaped like birds and mammals, and so it's kind of a decorative glass. Okay, so the Adena culture gave way into the more elaborate Hopewell culture, which itself lasted about 500 years. So both of these lasted for about 1,000 years, around the same time as the ancient Greeks and so forth. That was around 400 BCE, around the same time that was going on. Arguably, they were much more powerful than they were given the sheer size of the land area where we found these items. And the Hopewell culture built more extensive burial mounds and filled them with even more elaborate grave goods. Around 800 CE to 1400 CE, the Mississippian culture emerged, and the Mississippian culture was the most powerful iteration of these mound builders. They had a trading network that extended for more than 2,000 miles. They left behind very distinctive mounds. And the largest archaeological site that remains of the culture was its capital, which is nearby present-day St. Louis, Missouri. And it was called Cahokia by archaeologists. So that city held about 20,000 people. It was the largest city to exist in North America up until Philadelphia reached that population in the year 1800. So this gives you a sense of where all the various Mississippian mounds have been discovered. And if you drive through the southern U.S. or through Ohio, you can see some of these. They look something like this. So this is on the Natchez Parkway in Mississippi, which, again, if you get down to that area of the country, I recommend you go see some of these. So when they've excavated into these, they've found all kinds of stuff buried. So there was probably some sort of wooden structure, we think, on top of the thing that may have been some kind of a shrine. And on top of it, they piled the earth on buried people and put a whole bunch of stuff in with them. This is an example of one of the more elaborate mounds built by the Hopewell culture. This is called the Serpent Mound Complex in southern Ohio. And these serpent mounds stretch for longer than football fields. So we don't know that many details of how the Mississippian civilization operated, but we do know that it was very dominant. So, for example, archaeologists discovered this wooden mask at a Cahokia dig site, and it was buried in an oblong mound about 6 feet high and about 250 feet long. The skeleton that this mask was on was draped in a large cape made of shell beads, and his head was facing southeast. Accompanying the skeleton with the mask were hundreds of arrowheads and other small items, and a few feet away were the skeletons of 7 other men and women. Not far away from that site, archaeologists discovered a grave site with the skeletons of 53 women aged 15 to 25, and another mass grave in the area contained 43 more women's skeletons and 4 men whose arms had been tied together at the elbows and whose heads and hands had been chopped off. In all, the Cahokians buried 270 people with the man who wore this mask. And what all that indicates is that whoever wore this mask wielded great power and dominance over large numbers of other people. We don't know how that power worked. We don't know who exactly he was or where he claimed that power, but clearly it was something impressive if he was able to be buried in such a circumstance. So we didn't even know, so this is a good example of how we make assumptions. The original European explorers or not the original European explorers, but the Americans who were working to develop southern Illinois for agriculture, they thought this was just a literal earthwork, or not a human-made earthwork. They thought it was a butte or some kind of a hill. And as late as the early 20th century. And what they discovered was that digging into it, that no, it was not a hill. It was the remnants of a man-made structure and what had once been a temple. And so we've excavated around it and kind of found what were the foundations of the temple's levels. So this was probably the center of what had once been a very large city that held 20,000 people. So I'll link to the Cahokia video, which will talk a little bit more about the city. Artists have recreated what it might have looked like here. But clearly this city was the center of a trading network that was once very extensive.